G'day there guys, welcome back to another episode of r/older than you think I am, where this is definitely not what it looks like. I swear honey, please take me back. Okay, so this one's titled, I'm not on a date with a pedo. Here's the context. My husband was 18 at the time, and I was 19. We went on a date to a local Zaxby's for some spicy fried mushrooms. So my husband looked maybe 30 because he had a full beard, and I look like I can pass as a middle schooler. So we both walk into Zaxby's and he orders as I find us a seat. We sit in a two-seater, which is one seat per person per booth. So we sat across from each other. We were holding hands and looking at each other lovingly. Then, out of nowhere, this maybe 50 to 60-year-old lady comes up to us and says, "Are you in love?" She said, looking me dead in the eye. Yes ma'am, we're dating." I hesitated because we had only been dating for 2 months. "Well, aren't you too young to be dating?" I guess she thought I was under 18. "No ma'am, I'm 19. She looked stunned, like I had just breathed fire, stunned. She held her heart and gasped, "I thought you were 12. In my head I said, "Damn, I'm not that young." She then just walked away like that was a normal conversation to have with a stranger. I then look at my husband and ask, "Did you think she was on something?" He said, "Sweetie, I look like a pedo. You're gonna get this a lot if we stay together." We then just laughed it off and finished our snack. Oh god, that's grim. I love that. Oh my god, I hit a kid. I just found this subreddit and I feel like I've found my people. Around 27 or 28, people finally stopped thinking I was a teenager, thank God. But pretty much my entire life, I've looked significantly younger than I am. Even when I was a kid, I was consistently a foot shorter and 2/3 of the weight of my normal height/normal weight. Childhood best friend, who was 8 months younger than me. I feel like I screwed that reading up. Anyway, I'm just puny. Like, I guarantee if I lived in the 1800s, I would have died of some pox or other before the age of 6th. Some highlights of age mistakes that come to mind. When I was about 15 or 16, I was in a Publix, and I ran into a classmate I was friendly with, who happens to look significantly older than her age. Quote unquote, the perfect storm. I made small talk with her for a few minutes, and then temporarily stepped away to snag a free sample from a booth the store had set up in front of the deli. The woman running the booth, obviously thinking I was like 6 years younger than I was, and that my friend was like 10 years older than she was, said, "Sweetie, why don't you ask your mum if it's okay for you to have one?" And then nodded at my friend to indicate who she meant. We both awkwardly stuttered that we were the same age and went to school together, and basically fled. That sample lady looked mortified. In retrospect, I feel a bit bad for her, but mostly my friend was the one who I think felt most humiliated by the encounter. The summer after I graduated from college, I went into a small local bookstore with my siblings. To be entirely fair to the cashier, I was buying a young adult book. It was an older book I'd read and reread as a teenager from the library, and on a whim, I decided I wanted my own copy. So that couldn't have helped appearances. I got up to the register and presented my debit card, and the girl behind the counter, who was definitely younger than me, scoffed and said to her co-worker, sotto voce, "When I was a kid, my parents never would let me get a debit card." She said it just loud enough for me to hear, clearly wanting me to know she thought I was a spoiled brat. In the best timing possible, my sister came up behind me and showed me a book she was looking at and asked if I'd ever read it. I casually said, "Oh yeah, I read that in college." It was okay, I wouldn't buy it though. Keep in mind, I had just graduated, so in college was like 2 months ago. But I milked that past tense for all it was worth. The cashier turned bright red, and I have to confess, I totally reveled in her embarrassment, because I felt like she'd been kinda crappy to me first. I have terrible poker face in general, so I think it's extremely unlikely that I wasn't full on smirking, though I'll never know for sure. And when I was in my mid-20s, a middle-aged man blew through a stop sign while texting and crashed into my car, totaling it in the process. I ended up being okay, but when the first responders showed up and asked how I felt, I said my back kinda hurt. I must have accidentally said the magic words, because I'd barely spoken before the EMTs were strapping me to a board to keep my spine straight, including tying straps around my forehead and throwing a C-collar on me. It ended up being completely unnecessary. I just had minor muscle strain from impact, but I'll never forget the other driver watching me carted dramatically into the ambulance, tied down to this board, and wailing to myself, "Oh my god, I hit a kid, I hit a kid." He probably thought I was a newly minted 16-year-old driver. For extra effect, I was wearing a t-shirt for the youth outreach program I volunteered for, which said, "Non-profit name kids," in huge letters on it. Going to the hospital was kind of a hassle, but I feel like I scarred that texter and driver straight, so maybe it was worth it. The guy seemed genuinely traumatized. I would too. Don't be silly, you're obviously only a student and don't know much. Insert usual disclaimer that even though I'm 24, people think that I'm 15 or 16 due to my baby face and 5'2" height, which is about 157 centimeters tall. This isn't a dramatic story, but one that always makes me laugh. So about 2 years ago, I was working as a registered general nurse in the hospital that I had trained in on a male medical ward where I did a lot of night shifts. There's male medical wards? That's new to me. During nights, we used to divide up workload between the 3 nurses on shift. 2 would give the medications to patients, and 1 would check all 27 patient OBS, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, etc., and update their end-to-bed documentation. On this particular night, I was checking the patient's OBS, end-of-bed notes, and chatting, as it was the only time I got to properly chat with patients and speak with their families. By doing this, I learn a lot about them / their situation, which helps us set up a plan to have supports at home if needed. I always started in the rooms I was looking after so I could judge how they were doing. Likewise with other nurses. This night, I was in the room where there was a lot of patients with either long-term or short-term memory issues, which is relevant later. As I was checking John's documentation and chatting, his wife came from the bathroom and we had the following conversation. John's wife to me says, "When will the nurse looking after John be in so I can speak to her about what happened today and get results on tests?" "Oh, I'm the nurse in charge of John tonight, what can I help you with?" Note, students wearing white tunics with the college crest on the left of the chest with navy pants and black shoes. I was wearing a white tunic with a blue trim around the edges and matching blue pants with white runners, matching the other nurses' uniforms. John's wife says, "Don't be silly, you're obviously only a student and don't know much. When will she be into us, or can you go get her?" "Mate, I'm a qualified nurse, and I know more about your husband currently, as the person in charge tonight hasn't been given handover of my patients yet. Are you wondering about X and Y tests done today, as the result?" John's wife interrupting me, "You're only 16, you can't answer my questions. I'll wait till the actual nurse comes in. You can go about your business now." As John had memory issues, he can't tell his wife who his nurse is. So I do what I'm told, but briefly leave the room and mention it to quote-unquote Sarah, who was the most senior nurse on that night and therefore in charge. I offer to give her handover on that patient quickly, but she says to keep going on with my job. Side note, Sarah had her own patients and couldn't listen into 2 other handovers, telling nurse coming on shift what happened that day / previous days, and would get handover on the rest once there was time. As Sarah had 3 patients, she finished doing their medications just as I was finishing up the OBS on my last patient. She was instantly grabbed by John's wife the moment she entered the room, and she started bombarding Sarah with questions. I wasn't paying much attention until I was walking out the door of the room and I heard this. Sarah says, "I'm sorry, but as they previously explained, I have not gotten handover on your husband yet, and me is the only person who has the information that you need. I'm sure me will be happy to answer your questions once her work is done. However, seeing as it is now 8:40, I will have to ask you to leave soon as visiting hours are over. Feel free to ring tomorrow morning if Me is in with other patients. John's wife has a shocked Pikachu face. I did wait outside the room for her, and she asked me a few questions about John, but nothing about the incident was said. Well, that's awkward, and if you guys have any awkward conversations or experiences like this, be sure to leave it down in the description below. I'm curious to see what's going on in you guys' lives. Anyway, if you liked the episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe and tell me what you thought. As always, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.